When the first copper cable successfully connected the floor of the Atlantic, the world held its breath. Before that moment, news of gold prices in London took 2 weeks to reach New York. After that moment, it took 2 minutes. The consensus was that this new speed would create new masters. They were wrong. Technology changed the velocity of money, but it didn't change who held the steering wheel. The British pound continued to rule the world for another 50 years, regardless of how fast the telegram traveled. Today we hear about blockchain, CBDCs, and instant settlement. We are being sold a narrative that new technology will inevitably overthrow the old order. But financial history doesn't operate at the speed of a microprocessor. It operates at the speed of faith and habit. Why do these old empires prove so hard to kill? And what is the actual price of replacing them? Consider the last time you looked at a map of global air travel. You rarely fly in a straight line from point A to point B. You fly through a hub. Atlanta, Dubai, London. You do this not because it is shorter, but because it is efficient. The infrastructure is already there. Money is by nature lazy. It follows the exact same path. The global financial system is not a flat, democratic network where every currency connects to every other currency. It is a hub-and-spoke system, and whether you are in Tokyo, Frankfurt, or São Paulo, the hub is still New York. This is the cold, structural reality that gets ignored in most economic debates. We often assume the US dollar dominates because the American economy is the strongest, or because its military is the largest. Those are factors, yes, but the primary reason the dollar wins is far simpler. It wins because everyone else is already using it. Data shows that the dollar is on one side of roughly 88% of all foreign exchange transactions. Think about what that means. If a company in Brazil wants to sell coffee to a buyer in Thailand, they don't trade real for baht. The liquidity isn't there. It's too expensive. Instead, the Brazilian company sells real for dollars, and the Thai buyer sells baht for dollars. Even when the United States is not involved in the trade, the dollar is the bridge. This creates a gravitational pull that has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with plumbing. We call this network asymmetry. The clearinghouses in New York and the messaging system known as SWIFT act as the central nervous system of this body. SWIFT is not a bank, it is a language, and right now the language of money is English. To transact outside of this hub is to step into a room where no one speaks your dialect. You can do it, but the friction is unbearable. This is where the concept of inertia becomes the empire's greatest defense. We are often told that the market is a rational place where capital seeks the best return, but in reality, the market is a creature of habit. The system relies on path dependence. The rails were laid down 70 years ago. The software, the legal frameworks, the compliance protocols, they are all calibrated to a specific standard. Tearing up these rails to build a new system like the BRICS nations often propose is not just a political challenge, it is a logistical nightmare. It creates a massive lock-in effect. The cost of switching is not just financial, it is operational. It is the cost of rewriting the entire operating system of global commerce while the machine is still running. So the world continues to use the dollar, not out of loyalty, not out of love for the Federal Reserve, but out of convenience. The laziness of the crowd is a far stronger moat than any standing army. A system doesn't need to be fair to survive. It just needs to be the only one that connects everyone. But connection is only the first layer of the trap. To truly understand why the system holds together even when it seems to be breaking, we have to look deeper than just the transaction methods. We have to look at where the money goes when it stops moving. We have to look at the illusion of safety. Here lies the greatest paradox of our financial era. Turn on the news and you hear the same story. The United States is drowning in debt. The Federal Reserve is printing money out of thin air. The system is unsustainable. Logically, investors should be running for the exits. But when a crisis actually hits, whether it is a pandemic, a war, or a banking collapse, where does the capital go? It does not run away from the United States. It runs straight to it. Why? Because in the brutal calculus of global finance, safety does not mean solvency. It does not mean the government has a balanced budget. Safety means liquidity. Imagine you are a sovereign nation holding $50 billion in reserves. You cannot store that in gold bars. The logistics are a nightmare. You cannot store it in real estate. It takes months to sell. You need an asset that you can dump in seconds, in massive quantities, without crashing the price. The US Treasury market is the only pool deep enough for whales to swim in without splashing the water. This creates a structural hierarchy, a pyramid. At the bottom of this pyramid sits US debt. It is the collateral that underpins the entire banking system. The euro is too fragmented. There is no single European bond, only German, French, or Italian debt, each with different risks. The Chinese market is too closed. Capital controls mean you might get your money in, but you can't guarantee getting it out. Gold is too scarce. So the world buys dollars, not out of admiration, but out of necessity. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. Because US debt is considered safe, everyone buys it. Because everyone buys it, the market becomes deeper and more liquid. And because it is the most liquid market on Earth, it becomes even safer. It acts like a financial black hole. The more debt America issues, the more the world needs that debt to use as collateral for their own trades. You can hate this casino. You can suspect the house is rigging the wheel. You can scream that the math doesn't add up. But if it is the only casino that never closes, the only one with enough chips to cash you out when the building catches fire, you sit down and play. This is why predictions of the dollar's collapse often fail. They look at the economics, but they miss the mechanics. The world is trapped in a loop of its own design, feeding the very beast it fears. However, there is a dark side to being the world's safe haven. When you own the only room where everyone wants to hide during a storm, you get to decide who comes in and who gets left out in the rain. But absolute power always comes with a specific temptation. When you own the network, you do not just facilitate the game. You have the power to ban the players. We call this the weaponization of the dollar. It is a feature that was once used sparingly, like a scalpel. Today it is used like a hammer. The mechanism is terrifyingly simple. It works in 3 stages. First, there are primary sanctions, stopping US citizens from trading with a target. Simple, direct. But then there is the second layer, the one that truly projects American power across borders. Secondary sanctions. This is the message sent to foreign banks in Europe, Asia, or South America. If you do business with our enemy, you lose access to us. It converts the network's centrality into a tool of coercion. And finally, there is the systemic option, the nuclear button. Removing a nation from SWIFT. This is not just freezing a bank account. It is the equivalent of deleting a nation's email address from the global server. You can still write letters, but no one will receive them. It works. In the short term, it is devastatingly effective. It cripples economies and isolates regimes. But this power creates a weaponization dilemma. Imagine a landlord who controls the only apartment building in town. He begins to change the locks every time a tenant disagrees with his house rules. He freezes their keys. He blocks their deliveries. Does this make the tenants behave better? Perhaps for a moment. But in the long run, it forces them to do the one thing they never wanted to do: build their own house. Even if that new house is smaller, even if the plumbing is bad, even if the roof leaks, they will build it. Because living in a house where the landlord cannot lock you out is no longer a luxury. It is a survival strategy. The aggressive use of sanctions has done more to accelerate the end of the dollar than any economic competitor ever could. It has transformed the exit strategy from an economic question into a national security imperative. Rivals are now willing to accept higher costs and slower transactions simply to avoid the risk of a sudden freeze. So the motivation to leave is there. The fear is real. The blueprints for the new house are being drawn. But motivation is not the same as capability. If building a new financial order was easy, it would have been done decades ago. The tenants are ready to move out, but they are discovering that the walls of the new walled garden next door are much harder to climb than they look. So is the new house, the one being built by China, ready for tenants? The short answer is no, and the reason has nothing to do with the size of the Chinese economy. It has to do with the architecture of the Chinese system. It is trapped by a fundamental economic law known as the impossible trinity, or the trilemma. This law states that a country cannot have all 3 of the following: a fixed exchange rate, an independent monetary policy, and free capital flow. You must pick 2. You cannot have 3. The United States chose free capital flow. It allows money to enter and leave the country instantly, without permission. This chaos is the price of being the world's reserve currency. Beijing, however, prioritizes stability. It chooses to control the flow of money to ensure political security. This creates a structural paradox for the yuan. To replace the dollar, China must convince the world to hold its currency. But to convince the world to hold it, China must promise that investors can sell it and leave the country whenever they want. Right now, that promise does not exist. The Chinese bond market, while massive, lacks the depth and legal protections of the West. There is always the lingering fear that if a crisis hits, the gates will slam shut and your capital will be trapped inside. This fear kills liquidity. It also explains why China's alternative payment system, CIPS, struggles to gain traction against SWIFT. It faces a classic coordination problem. Banks have no incentive to join a platform that their trading partners aren't using. It is a network with few connections. You simply cannot run a global reserve currency from behind a closed door. Think of it like hosting a dinner party. You want to be the most popular venue in town. You want everyone to come. but you also insist on searching every guest's bag before they are allowed to leave the house. You can force your close friends to attend. You can pay people to attend. But the moment you stop paying, the room empties. To become the king of money, you must be willing to lose control of it. And that is a trade-off Beijing is not yet willing to make. So the transition away from the dollar will not be a sudden flip of a switch. It will be slow, fragmented, and messy. But while the old empires are locked in this stalemate, one unwilling to change, the other unwilling to open, a completely new type of money is being written into code. It is called CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. Do not make the mistake of confusing this with the money currently sitting in your bank app. When you use a credit card or a banking app today, you are moving digital representations of cash. It is passive. It sits there until you decide to move it. CBDC is different. It is active. It is programmable. This means the money itself contains logic. It creates a direct link between the central bank and your digital wallet, bypassing the commercial banking layer entirely. And this brings us to the most radical feature of this new system, the expiration date. Imagine receiving your salary on the 1st of the month, but with a condition attached: you must spend it by the 30th, or it vanishes. This is not science fiction. China has already tested digital yuan with expiration dates to force consumption and stimulate the economy. For a central planner, this is a dream. It allows them to bypass the zero lower bound of interest rates. In a recession, instead of lowering rates and hoping you spend, they can simply program your savings to shrink. They can impose negative interest rates directly on your wallet. It converts money from a store of value into a hot potato that you are forced to throw away. They call this smart money. But we must ask, smart for whom? It is certainly smart for the economist trying to micromanage inflation. But for the saver, it marks the end of financial privacy. In this system, money stops being a private asset that you own. It becomes a government voucher that you are permitted to use. It transforms from a tool of freedom into a tool of policy enforcement. And because this money is a direct liability of the central bank, it poses an existential threat to traditional banks. In a crisis, why would you keep your money in a risky commercial bank when you can move it to the safety of the central bank with one click? It creates the potential for the fastest bank run in history. So as the world rushes toward a future of programmable, traceable, and potentially expiring money, the instinct of the wary investor is not to get more digital. It is to get physical. When the software becomes too controlling, the only escape is hardware. When money becomes too smart, too noisy, and too controlled, human beings instinctively seek silence. Gold. It has no server. It has no source code. It cannot be programmed to expire. In a world where every transaction is a line of code monitored by a central database, this block of inert metal represents something that is becoming extinct: privacy. We often talk about gold as an investment, comparing its price to stocks or bonds. But in the era of central bank digital currencies, that comparison is flawed. Gold is not an investment in this context. It is an exit strategy. If the future of money involves negative interest rates where you are charged a fee just for holding cash, or if it involves programmable expiration dates to force you to spend, then the ability to opt out of that system becomes the most valuable luxury on earth. Gold is the only financial asset that is not someone else's liability. It does not rely on a bank to stay open, a government to stay solvent, or a power grid to stay on. There is a profound irony here. For the last 100 years, economists have ridiculed the gold standard as a barbarous relic. They argued that it was too rigid, that it prevented governments from printing money to fight recessions. And they were right, it was rigid. But today we are realizing that this rigidity was not a bug. It was a feature. The flexibility of modern fiat currency has allowed for endless expansion, but it has also allowed for endless debasement. So as we move toward a fully digital, fully tracked economy, the premium on tangibility will rise. History shows a strange rule. The more complex the technology becomes, the more desperate the demand for things that are simple, physical, and unhackable. However, gold has a flaw. It is heavy. It is slow. It cannot move across the ocean in a millisecond. To build a global system, you need speed. And to have speed without total control, you need to understand the software that runs on the human mind, culture. Because what works in New York does not always work in the rest of the world. Finally, we must confront the reality that the greatest barrier to a universal global currency is not technology. It is the human being. We often operate under the assumption that money is a universal language, that every human on the planet responds to a dollar in the exact same way. This is a profound misunderstanding of our own species. In the West, specifically within what social scientists call weird cultures, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic money is viewed primarily as a transaction. It is a cold, contractual exchange You perform a specific service, you receive a digital digit, and the obligation ends there. But travel to Mumbai, Lagos, or Jakarta, and you will find a different genetic code for value. In these cultures, work and money are understood as relational obligations. A favor done today is a debt held in the social fabric, not just on a digital ledger. Loyalty, family ties, and social norms often carry far more weight than a percentage bonus in a bank account. Research confirms this divide. The money advantage, the power of cash incentives to drive human effort, is nearly twice as effective in the United States as it is in India. Western economists spent decades trying to export their New York textbooks to the rest of the world, and they were genuinely surprised when the world refused to act like a single giant boardroom. They viewed the inefficiency of culture as a bug to be fixed. They are beginning to realize it is a feature that cannot be deleted. This is why a one-size-fits-all global currency is a technocratic dream, but a cultural nightmare. For global businesses, this diversity has created a landscape of extreme fragmentation. A retailer cannot simply accept money. They must navigate a labyrinth of expectations. In the US, consumers demand PayPal or Venmo. In Australia, it is Afterpay. In the UK, it is lay-by. Today, alternative payment methods, digital wallets, QR codes, and buy now, pay later schemes account for over 31% of payments, even in the United States. The friction is real. Global corporations are now facing a risk landscape where fraud losses are projected to hit $49 billion by 2030. Security is no longer just about a thick vault. It is about protecting the 80% of a company's value that exists as an intangible asset, brand reputation. To survive this, the kings of commerce are not building a single empire. They are hiring orchestrators. They are using payment orchestration platforms to layer software on top of software, trying to speak every local financial dialect simultaneously. Over 76% of large tech-focused businesses have already abandoned the idea of a one-stop shop for payments. The system is not converging into a single point of power. It is fracturing under the weight of human diversity. We are realizing that you cannot build a global empire on code alone if you do not understand the genetics of the culture it sits upon. The digital world promised to make us one. Instead, it is revealing just how different we have always been. The world is too vast to accept a single king forever, which brings us to the final question. If the technology is ready but the people are not, where does that leave us? We are entering a transition that no one can stop, but no one truly controls. It is time to look at the lock on the door and see who actually holds the key. In 1866, the world shrank because of a single copper thread. But while the distance disappeared, the power was never shared. It was merely concentrated. Today we live in an age where you can beam wealth across the planet in a millisecond. But in this rush for efficiency, do not mistake velocity for sovereignty. We must confront a cold reality. Those digits flashing in your digital wallet, who do they actually belong to? Do they belong to you? Or do they belong to the entity that hosts the server, the engineers who write the smart contracts, or the central planner who holds the ultimate kill switch? The old empires are not crumbling. They are evolving. They are migrating from the fragility of ink and paper into the immutable architecture of code. And as we transition into this new era, the most urgent question is no longer about the price of an asset or the strength of a currency. It is this: in this new perfectly tracked and programmable world, where does your freedom actually reside? If you are prepared to continue this investigation into the hidden mechanics of power and money, leave a 1 in the comments below. Your perspective is the only thing the system cannot program. And don't forget to subscribe to Financial Money History, because history never truly ends. It is simply waiting for you to turn the next page.